Hello and welcome. My name is Tim, and for 3 weeks I work on a tugboat like this, and then I have 3 weeks off and I hang out on a boat like this. Actually, this boat. I bought this boat a few years ago, and since then have been sailing it up and down the east coast of the U.S. and into the Caribbean. We've been fortunate enough to put about 6,000 miles under the keel in the last few years. And these are some of the things that I've learned in that time. Stick around, I hope you like it. Okay, it's true. I'm on the tugboat, not on the sailboat. It's the sailboat channel. I just have a moment to go over some stuff. We have a little bit of downtime here, so I figured I'd relay this to you. One of the things that I've learned is that there's a big misconception from my perspective, from talking to many people in the anchorage and along the docks, and even some of you guys online and from owners associations and that sort of thing. It seems as though there's a big, perhaps we should say a broad spectrum of understanding of power and requirements and that sort of stuff. And this really shouldn't surprise me. Those that have been following my other channel for a long time might know that I have a kind of a background in alternative energy. I've had a number of, I've installed a number of different solar installations, and my house in Puerto Rico is off grid. I had the first XY tracker in Rhode Island for grid tie system, and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, I put in a system over there. And I come from an island up in Maine that had no electricity, so we've been working with alternative energy since basically I could walk. So anyway, doesn't make me an expert or anything like that, but I do hear a lot of things that sound familiar. And what I mean by this is when people talk about solar panels for a house, I have a solar system. People won't say that I have a 6 kW system. What they'll say is Joe, my neighbor Joe, he's got 45 panels. That literally means nothing. It's how big, how many panels you have doesn't mean anything. So a lot of people will equate, I don't know this, but what I'm suspecting and what I'm hearing in the anchorage and other places, people are kind of making a similar thing today. They'll say, I just switched to lithium, or I know this guy who switched to lithium, and he went with 6 batteries, or he went with 2 batteries. And none of that means anything. Batteries can, there's very small lithium batteries and very big ones, so none of that means anything. And what this really comes down to, whether you're doing a off-grid installation at home or you're doing something on your boat, I really encourage you people, I say that's a horrible way to say that, you people. I encourage all of us, maybe that'll be better, to really take the time and do the math. And the math is something that a lot of people don't want to do, especially it seems as though those of us that knew our system 20 years ago, and our system has worked great for us, and we kind of think that's the way it is. We don't really take into consideration that many changes have happened along the way. Not only in technology, but a system that was, for example, my boat's 20 years old. And when it came out of the factory, I believe it had 4 AGM batteries in it, or at least 4 lead acid batteries anyway. And 20 years ago, that was probably fine for what they needed to do on the boat then. But the power requirements a boat 20 years ago had are much different than the power requirements a boat has today. And if you're putting in a lithium system with the hopes that it's going to last at least 10 years and maybe even a lot longer than that, you really should look to see what are my power requirements going to be in the future as well. And I think when we do the math and we measure the things, people find out the hard truth, and that's that it's very rare that you always have enough power. People, you hear, I'm so sick of hearing everybody who's gotten lithium say, it's a game changer. And yeah, it is. But that doesn't mean that it works. Let me give you an example. I went from, when I bought the boat, it had 6 AGM batteries in it. I think somebody had done an upgrade there along the way. And I'm going to show you how it was set up and how it's set up now. But just hear me out with this. So it had 6 AGM batteries, roughly 600 amp hours, but because you can only use the top 50% of that at best, that's being really generous. It had about 300 amp hours of usable power there. Now I've gotten to 900 amp hours of lithium, and everyone I talk to says, oh, you've got too much, you've got way too much. First of all, I don't really understand the concept of too much, only because I'm looking towards the future and what it does now. Second of all, if you just look at a number and say it's too much without knowing how much you use, then you really shouldn't be talking about whether it's too much or not. And I'm not trying to say that these people are wrong for criticizing my system or not. That's not what I'm getting at. I'm just saying that I think a lot of people think in terms of sizes they're familiar with and not with the requirements of each individual on each individual boat. What does that mean? So on Paquita, we are a very power hungry boat. We use a lot of power for a lot of things. And it seems as though in the cruising community, from what I see online, what people write to me in the comments, and the people that I talk to in the anchorages and on the docks, it seems as though there's basically 2 types of live aboard cruisers, or people like me that are living on for half the time and working for the other half of the time. And those are some of the people that are almost minimalist. They have very small systems, if any systems at all, and they don't require a lot of power. And you know what? These guys are really smart. Because of that, they've saved more money to go cruising, and there are less things that go wrong. And that's great. But that's not how a lot of people envision how they want to spend their retirement or their free time or their vacation time. And that's not exactly how I wanted to do that either. There are a couple channels that I'm a patron of people that have sailed around, that are sailing around the world right now. Holly on Wind Hippie Sailing. She doesn't have any electronics, and she doesn't have any fancy electronics. She doesn't have a chart plotter or anything like that. And she doesn't even have refrigeration on her boat. And God bless her, she's doing it. She's over there, now she's over in New Zealand, I think. And I'm over here working. So she figured out how to do that. But that's not the lifestyle I want to live. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. Like I say, I love her channel. I think what she's doing is wonderful. And there's a whole bunch of other ones that do the same sort of thing. And maybe you do. Maybe your boat is great. You set it up for the weekend. You're all good like that. You can bring a bunch of ice with you. That's not, bringing ice with me is not going to work for me. Different people have different needs of how they envision their time living aboard their boat. And in my case, I gave up a house that I'd spent almost 30 years getting to where I wanted it. I worked during all my free time, put all my money into the house, and when it got all done, I sold it. Anyway, since I sold my house, I wanted to make sure that the boat I moved in on was going to have some of the comforts of a real home. It wasn't going to be a weekend getaway thing for me. So that's kind of where I went. So anyway, just to give you an idea, we have some power hungry things on our boat, on Paquita. We have a big freezer and a big refrigerator that are running 24 hours a day. I also leave my 3 kilowatt Victron Multi-Plus inverter going all the time, so the boat has AC power all the time. If I turn that on or off, I could save a little bit of power turning it on and off. Not to mention that if it was off, other things wouldn't be able to use it. Like I leave it on primarily for my Starlink. And for those of you that are interested in Starlink on a boat, you should know that Starlink is a very power hungry thing. It doesn't take a lot of power all at once, but over 24 hours, be prepared to use quite a bit. And I'm thinking like 35, 40 watts continuously and you say, oh, that's not that much. Yeah, do the math. You're gonna see over 24 hours, it's gonna be a lot of battery that you're gonna have to put to that. Then because I have the AC on, not the air conditioning, but the alternating current through the inverter. There are other things that are plugged in there. We're charging laptops and tablets and telephones and all kinds of stuff like this. And so there's a whole bunch of charging going on that's always happening. And yeah, we probably don't have to do that. And there might even be more economical ways to do that. Economical in the sense of power, you know, for example, if instead of getting 12 volts, bringing it up to 120 volts AC, then bringing it back down to 5 volts DC through a power brick and then charging, you could just do that straight through from the DC to DC, and there'd be a minimal savings there. All those add up to something, but the bottom line is Paquita uses about 150 watts all the time, bare minimum, without doing anything. And this is at anchor. And sometimes around 200 watts, and it depends on what's happening, what we're charging, how, you know, the load of the, you know, are people streaming stuff, you know, if you're using your laptop or the TV on the wall, all these things, it all adds up. So anyway, so we're using 150 watts minimum, 24 hours a day, sometimes as much as 200 watts a day, an hour. And when we're sailing, because I usually run all the electronics, and some people say, oh, well, you don't need to do that, and you don't. I come from a background of being a professional mariner, and one of the rules that the Coast Guard has for us is that if we have a piece of equipment on board the boat, it has to be running. And I'm a big believer that we run the radar even when it's light out and you don't need it, and people say, oh, you're wasting batteries. The good news is the new digital radars use hardly any power at all, but you run this so that you will continue to be, your situational awareness of seeing the radar overlay on your chart plotter will work much better if you're accustomed to seeing things in the daylight or in good weather, so that when it's dark or in bad weather, you're not seeing a new picture for the first time. But anyway, what that means is that when we're cruising with the engine off and sailing, I'm usually burning about 250 watts. Now granted, when we make coffee, we're burning a lot more. When Cristalita, who is, as many of you know, a beautiful woman who owns my heart, she likes to use she uses a hair dryer and sometimes a flat iron or I don't know what they call it, whatever those things called that they straighten her hair out with. It drives me crazy because I love her hair curly. But there are a lot of things that use a lot of power on the boat. But basically those numbers, you say, well, 150 watts doesn't sound that bad. That's actually 3.6 kilowatts of power during the day. So when I tell people I have 900 watts of lithium, they go, oh my God, that's so much. You'll never run out of power. That's not that much. If you used 100% of it, which I set mine to use the top 80% of it, but if you used 100%, which you can do, that would be just shy of 12 kilowatts, 11 and 5. So let's just say that I have 10 kilowatts available. Well, the least Paquita will take is going to be about 3.6 kilowatts a day. So if I had no power, nothing charging this up, and I did the bare minimum that I could do, in 3 days it'd be a dead ship anyway. So that's not that much. Now if that 150 watts turns into 200, which what does, you know, when you have more people on, you're doing more things, people are charging more things, and that sort of things happen. Anyway, that comes to 4.8 kilowatts. So basically your 3 days just went to 2 days. In 2 days you're dead. It's a dead ship after that. There's no power. So, and then when you're sailing, you say, well, you know, you got all this power. Yeah, if I'm sailing, I'm drawing 6 kilowatts a day. Every 24 hours, 6 kilowatts is gone. 6 kilowatts, and remember, I only have about 9 or 10 that I can use if I don't put any back. Now, we have ways of putting it back, and we're going to talk about all that. All I'm saying is that the big number of 900 amp hours, everyone says, oh my God, that's so big. That's not that big when you think about it, because if I'm sailing, it's only going to be about, less than 2 days I'd be dead shit once again. So before people start, when I talk to some people and they're like, yeah, well, I think I have this and this is what I'm gonna do, and I'm like, I just saw one of my friends, I don't want to mention him by name in case he gets mad at me for saying this, but he just got, I don't think he was that familiar with the whole process, and he knew that his batteries were bad and he needed to buy new batteries, and he talked to a kid and the kid tried to help him out and got him new batteries, but then they put it together in a weird way. And I personally think that the problem with the system is that they never did the math. And the math meaning how much is going out, how much is going in, how much do you need to hold. And so, I mean, in Paquita's case, we have 3 ways of charging. We can charge, if you plug in through the shore power, which the inverter can charge 120 amps on that, or I can run my generator. I have a Northern Lights generator, and so in other words, I can put a whole ton of power in the battery bank very quickly through the Victron multi-plus inverter. I also have about 1,100 watts of solar, and I'll go through all that with you too and show you that. And then I have a 170 amp alternator that has been detuned. Presently it's detuned down to about 100 amps. Probably going to raise that up to about 150, but I have to keep an eye on the belt. It's got a big serpentine belt on it, and just because it can do all that, I don't know, I want to make sure that I'm not burning belts up, because of, when they increase the field and it puts more resistance on the alternator, and the alternator's power, it gets power from the engine through the belt. So the belt, if I charge my batteries faster and keep burning out belts, I haven't really solved the problem. So that's what I'm trying to get at. Anyway, I have 3 ways of charging. So I got to figure out the power going out, the power coming in, and how it all works together. And that's what I talk about when I say I really try to encourage people, do the math. The first thing is do the math. If you have an older system and you're getting ready and you haven't, and if you checked your older system, like with AGM or lead acid and AGM are basically the same chemistry, but anyway, if you checked where you were through voltage, that's not a way that you can really check accurately with lithium ion phosphate. So you really need a shunt with a battery monitor that measures amps in and amps out, and that will give you a much more accurate state of charge. For example, the batteries I have, you can charge them right to 14.4, then they'll go into float, and if you don't charge them at all, they'll actually settle down to 13.2, I believe it is. So there's a vast difference between there, and it's all still 100% state of charge. The difference is what you put in versus what you take out. So if you're gonna buy anything, before you buy lithium batteries, before you do anything, make sure you got a good shunt or battery monitor, and a good battery monitor is one that has a shunt that measures things coming in and going out. And then do the math. Once you have that, you can still use that with your old system to say, okay, my refrigerator, my freezer are taking this much. My navigation equipment takes this many amps or watts. You can do whatever you want, and you can figure all that sort of stuff out. And that's something that I really encourage people to do first. And having said that, I can show you some stuff that we did here on my system. Okay, so here's a real rough drawn system of how my system worked. This is how the boat basically came. We had 6 of these AGM batteries here. We had a 2 kilowatt Xantrex inverter. We did have a Blue Seas power monitor with a shunt, but I took that out because I wanted to have everything go. But well, you'll find this here in a second. But anyway, shore power would come in through here and it would charge, and we'd have 120 coming out of the inverter there. And then we had, through bus bars and that sort of stuff, we have a way of charging. We had a 165 watt solar panel with a Blue Seas 20 amp charge controller, MPPT. And there was also 2 other I think they were 80 watt solar panels, and unfortunately they put them all together, which really doesn't work. That's not how this system works. The voltage, the amperage, and the make were all completely different. So it was kind of weird. Putting all those together, we would actually make less power than taking those two away and letting the 165 watt panel work on its own. But anyway, so we took those other two ones away, and I gave them to my buddy Ian. I think he put it on his camper. But anyway, then we had a line going over to the 170 amp alternator, and that went over to the it was a Balmar alternator with a Balmar MC614 external regulator, and then that went back and charged as well. Like I say, it's detuned down to 100 amps. So that's basically what we were looking at before. Now, and of the 600 amp hours here, remember, it would be very generous to say we had 300 amp hours of usable power. So here is the schematic of the system the way it is now, and basically we have 3 of these 300 amp hour ampere time, which is now, it's a Chinese clone that Will Prowse. If you guys aren't familiar with Will Prowse, he's an electrical engineer on YouTube that's phenomenal, and all he does is he just rips down batteries, and he can rip down the batteries and take a look at the BMS. All these batteries have something called a BMS, a battery management system, on the inside, and it protects the battery from over voltage, under voltage, temperature, a bunch of different parameters it checks for. Anyway, he looks at these things and he knows whether they're a good brand or a bad brand, and whether the batteries are first run, A's or B's or C's, and he can figure all that stuff out. He does the test on whether a 300 amp hour battery really will last for 300 amp hours. And just so you know too, there's a couple different ways they can do this. They call it a C rating, and that's a whole nother thing too, but to get 300 amp hours out of a 300 amp hour battery, they're not just going to do this in a dead short. It doesn't work that way. It's a chemical reaction, so you have to draw out like 20 amps over time, and that's how that works. But anyway, let's not get there. So friend of mine, Sean, who is really good at reading the ABYC standards and communicating them to me, because I'm not good at that at all. And having the boat be ABYC compliant is really important for me. Not only for me, but if I ever go to sell the boat, I imagine the next person who buys it will probably want everything to be up to the ABCY standard, not for 2002 like the boat, but for the whenever they buy it. So this is what we have had to do. We put these 3 batteries in here, and as per the standard, we needed to put a Class T fuse no more than 7 inches away from the last positive of the battery, which was really kind of that blows my mind, but that's what they want. They don't want any more than 7 inches. You can go up to 48 inches if you put it in a conduit or open chase, and then that also has some other problems. But anyway, they also want a main disconnect before you get to your bus bar. The boat originally had everything going to the bus bar and the main disconnect and fuses afterwards. That's how it was before. But then anyway, here's my shunt. I use a Victron, I believe it's a BMV 614, I think, something like that. I think that's what it is. But anyway, that's what monitors that. We have the inverter charger here, which is the MultiPlus 3000 and 120 amp charge. And then we've got our different bus bars here. I've got a bunch of solar panels here, and each solar panel has its own MPPT controller on it. And so this helps for a couple of different things. One is that if because I have a double backstay, I'm able to put one panel that's 430 watts in the middle between that, and then there's room for 200 watts of panel on either side of it, and then I've got a 100 watt and 165 watt, the other one there. And so each one of those, they're on their own solar MPPT charge controller, so that in the event that one gets shaded or is at a different angle because of the heel of the boat or whatever it is, it won't affect the rest of them. And it also helps in redundancy. Out of all of these, only the big one is different. All the other ones can be interchanged anytime. If one were to die and I was in another part of the world where it might be difficult to get something, I could swap something around to make it better. And that's something that redundancy is something that I've learned in this line of work, that is something that we can't stress enough. But anyway, for the we have our DC panel. I also have, this is something that is worth mentioning. I have a DC to DC charger, and I see everybody online do this, what I call backwards. And that's that, I guess, when I say they do it backwards, I think it's because people are usually doing this, they're making van conversions, people who go, living in a van life and that sort of stuff, and they pull that over onto a sailboat or a power boat, and they try to do the same thing. Where the problem is that most people will use their alternator to charge their starting battery, and they'll have the alternator's internal regulator, or even use an external regulator to do that, and they set up the charge profile for the lead acid starting battery. Then they'll use a DC to DC charger to charge their house bank. Now, the reason why I say this is so stupid to do that, or at least it doesn't make sense for me to do that, I don't mean that it's stupid, that's not the best choice of words I ever had, but if I have a 170 amp alternator and I have a 18 amp DC to DC charger, this is going to put just a little bit of power, because whatever it took to start the engine, that's how much the starting battery will be down. So like almost instantaneously this battery will go into float, and then we'll try to charge 900 amp hours of battery at 18 amps. It's gonna take forever to do that. That's so stupid. And we're not utilizing the 170 amps of the alternator here, or in my case I've got it dialed, detuned down to 100 at the moment. So what I have with mine, you'll see mine goes right back over here. The 170 amp battery alternator detuned down presently to 100 amps, but I'm probably going to try to get it up to 150, but monitor the belt. All that goes, and it goes through the external regulator, and this is a Balmar 614, I believe. Anyway, this one, we're gonna, and we also have a temperature sensor on here and a transient spike adapter. All of this is going to put everything into the lithium batteries that it can take. And this is really important, because if you have lead acid batteries or AGMs, just like you had when you were in your garage and you put a trickle charger on there, you saw the needle was pegged over one way, and as the battery got charged, the needle started going down. That charger is not a smart charger. It's not slowing down the rate of charge. What's happening is the resistance in the battery is getting more and more and not allowing it to be charged as it goes. Well, lithium batteries don't work that way. There is resistance, but nothing compared to a lead acid chemistry battery. So these batteries are going to say, give me everything you can take, and you have to you have to look into the C rating so that you don't overcharge them. With 900 amp hours, I need a lot of power to try to overcharge these, because I think it's usually a 2C rating. But anyway, we don't even approach that with everything. If we had all three things charging all at once, it still wouldn't be enough. But anyway, this will charge as much as it can, and this is a problem that it bears talking about. People don't realize this. When you start, in my case, of my Yanmar, and it's idling, and I let it idle, and it's coming up at temperature while I'm getting ready to get underway and that sort of stuff. I have my regulator set, so I think it waits like 90 seconds to get the oil pressure up and everything else starts, and then it slowly starts increasing the field voltage, so that the field of the battery, the field of the alternator will increase, and the output will increase, and it will start dumping power in here. Now these are going to call for as much as they'll take, and that could be at the full rate of the alternator at that time. The problem is the alternators are cooled with a fan. So if I'm idling, it's going to ask for all the power it can get. And that alternator is going to heat up really fast. Now the good news about this ball mower and this regulator is that it has a temperature sensor in there, and if it gets hot, it lowers the voltage on the field and doesn't charge as fast, and so that way you don't burn up your alternator. That's really important. There's another thing that's really important too, and that's that because remember we were talking about the BMS, the battery management system in each one of these batteries. You won't even see it. It's built into them. There is the potential that this thing can be putting out 100 amps. Maybe the solar panels are putting out 50 amps. I don't know. Maybe it's really sunny. Maybe I don't know why you would be plugged in and running your alternator at the same time, but that's a possibility too. You could have a lot of power going into these batteries, and they're going to take it, and they're going to take it, and they're going to take it, and then they reach that threshold where they say we don't want it anymore, and each of the BMSs, the battery management system, will click out, and it says we don't want it anymore, and it shuts off. The problem with doing that is that you send what they call a transient spike back to the alternator. And this, in simpler terms, this isn't probably the best analogy, but in a simpler term, you can think of it as a voltage spike. You know, when your lights get real bright for a second and something burns up or whatever. Well, anyway, it ends up burning up the diodes in an alternator. And my particular alternator is about $1,000 alternator, so I don't want to do that. So there's something that we use that's called a transient spike arrestor, and it's my buddy Sean, who has been guiding me through this whole thing, making sure that I'm in compliance and doing everything right. He was able to buy all the stuff and make his own transient spike arrestor for like $5. I was so happy to be able to not have that be an issue and buy it from Balmar. I bought it from them, and I think it was like $48, but $48 to save $1,000 part was a good deal for me. So that's what I have on there. So that basically shows you the entire system. The only thing that I don't have on this picture right here is I also have something called a Serbo GX, which is something that actually monitors everything that goes on here, and it also monitors my water, how much water is in my water tank, the temperature in my refrigerator, the temperature in my freezer, and the temperature in my hot water tank. And it puts all that and it sends it out online, so even while I'm here on the boat, I can check the status of the whole system of Paquita while she's waiting for me. So that's kind of really cool, but that's not on here. But I highly recommend to you, number one, do the math, figure out how much you need, figure out how much you can put in, and you know, and when you do that, if you're figuring that you're going to be burning 6 kW in a day, or at 250 watts while you're sailing, but you know that you have enough power that you might be able to bring in on a perfect day almost 5 kW, you've almost broken even at that point. You see what I'm saying? So if you burn 6 but you bring in 5 just from the sun, that's really good. Now just to let you know that that's being really generous. I have found that when my best days sailing are usually overcast and the wind is blowing, and the boat, even when it's sunny, the boat always seems to heel to away from the sun. I'm not exactly sure why yet, but anyway, these are things that you have to think about. Or you might think, hey, you know what? I'm going to be running for 45 minutes to get to into the anchorage or through the reef or the inlet or up to there. So I'll be running the alternator, and in that time I'll be putting in this much power. And then the next day when you haul your, you know, you're going to use a windlass to haul your anchor and maybe not sail off the mooring or whatever, you'll be using it again. So you can figure out all that, how long you go. But remember that how many panels you have and how many batteries you have mean nothing. It's the numbers. You need to run the numbers. And that's about it. So there is my electrical thing. Oh, you know what? I hope that I got to go through some still pictures. I'll try to insert some still pictures of the installation of how it all went down. But that's basically how it is. And the only thing we didn't cover, and I had somebody that was asking about this in the comments before. They said, "What about you?" After I installed my Northern Lights generator, they wanted me to do it. And you know what? I really should do a separate video just for that, to talk about how the generator. It's funny because I had a couple of problems. My alternator hadn't been working for a while. It had a wire that it's broken somewhere, so sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And what was happening was I was having to run the generator for a couple hours almost every day just to keep everything topped up. Now, since that alternator issue is fixed, with the lithium giving me such a broader time to go in between charging and having to use the main engine when I get up in the morning and the last thing at night at a bare minimum, it goes for a long time without starting the generator, so it's pretty cool. Hey, you know, one thing I also didn't go over here was that Sean did have me put in these fuses, not only the number one here and the one going to the off of the bus bars. There's has to be fuses and disconnects to the inverter, that sort of thing. But I also put a 170 amp fuse right on the end of the alternator, and this has to do with the fact that we're not, years ago we'd have a 65 amp alternator. The thing would put out 30 amps most of the time, and if there was a problem in there, you didn't have enough power in your batteries to go back and blow the thing up. Well, now we've got a lot more power, and the lithium has the ability to send so much power out. You have to increase in my case, I had to go from smaller wires to much bigger wires throughout everything, because we have the ability to charge faster, and going from a 2 kW inverter to a 3 kW inverter, we have the ability to pull more power out. So be careful with those things. And you guys, thank you so much for watching. It sounds like a lot. Once you wrap your head around it, it's not a big deal. And the numbers, what I love about this stuff is that the math works. It works. There's no lying in here. Unlike a lot of things around, sailors have been known for embellishment. You can't embellish the numbers. This is what you use. This is what you charge. That's how it works, and it works. I encourage you, if you haven't gone with lithium ion, it's not as expensive as it was a few years ago. In fact, right now it's almost cheaper to go that way, and it lasts so much longer. And it's not just how much it lasts, it's that you can charge faster. There is no, absorption and float and all this sort of stuff. You just charge, shut off. It's great. It's wonderful. Wish you guys the best of luck. I hope you like the series. If you have any comments, please send them to me. I love reading all your comments. And you guys take care, be safe, and I'll see you on the one. Oh wait, I almost forgot to tell you. I got the whole system done. I'm all excited. I go to wrap everything up. I put the DC panel back together, and everything dies. Nothing works. I start going tracing back, and I finally found the culprit. After like 2 hours of pulling my hair out, the power to the bus bar in the back of the DC panel broke.